Trauma. Big word, big word, big meaning. Even saying the word and Zoom and technology all at the same time produces trauma. And typically when we've used that word, we've thought of it as kind of an incident, a happening, kind of a blunt hit that put us into trauma. But the truth is, the way the world is now, with all of its, shall we say, complexities, trauma is every day. Every time you look at the news, social media, go to work, talk to your family, try to use technology, there's trauma. It's ongoing, it's sustaining, it's not going away. And we're all affected by it. Many much worse than others. If you're part of a marginalized community, if you feel discrimination, if you feel hate, it's even worse. It's unstoppable, it's unsustainable, but it's what we're all living with, which is why we need to become trauma-informed. Being trauma-informed is something that other industries, other disciplines have been talking about for a while now. In fact, there's 2 books on the New York Times bestseller list that talks about being trauma-informed. So we, as a communication industry, also need to become trauma-informed in our communications, in our dealings with our colleagues, our workplace, our clients, and in the work we do. And we at Ketchum have made a commitment to become trauma-informed for our clients and for our people. So that's the topic for today, is how do we in fact become trauma-informed as an industry, not only in the workplace, but in the work we do for our clients or with our agency partners or wherever we're coming from within the industry. Fortunately, I have 2 friends, 2 experts in this topic who come at it from very different angles, who will chat about it with us, and then we'll open it up for questions at the end. But let's start with some introductions, if that's okay. I'll start with you, Catherine, if you could introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. Good morning. My name is Catherine Manning. My background is that I'm a lawyer. I've worked with crime victims for most of my career. I've spent about 25 years working on issues of trauma and victimization, including 15 years at the U.S. Department of Justice, where I was a senior attorney advisor on victims' rights. And that meant that I advised the department on how it works with victims in cases, huge fraud cases like Bernie Madoff, or terrorism like the Boston Marathon. And one of the things I began to realize was that when we are having those moments where our lives feel turned upside down, we all need the same things. And it doesn't just happen in the criminal justice system. It happens in every workplace and every organization around the world. And so I left the Justice Department in 2019 and formed my own company, which is called Blackbird, and we do training and consulting on what I call empathy when it matters most. And I wrote a book on this topic called The Empathetic Workplace: 5 Steps to a Compassionate, Calm, and Confident Response to Trauma on the Job.
Awesome. Susan?
So I apologize. I am also a lawyer. It turns out we did not know we went to the same law school. Obviously, different times. I became interested in depression and anxiety due to my former work at the U.S. Agency for International Development when I did work in Bosnia. And as you can imagine, we dealt with very traumatized people. And then I was the assistant dean at Georgetown Law School, and I learned that many lawyers and students are incredibly anxious and depressed, and no one talked about it. One felt uncomfortable, and as you can see, I have an accent, and in many cultures, one does not speak about depression and anxiety. So I was very lucky when I was able to become the executive director of the Anxiety and Depression Association of America. It has been very, very busy for us. My staff and I are, frankly, incredibly stressed. But I wanted to make a shout out to Ketchum, because we just hired them. And there's a lot of wonderful PR firms, many of you are here. But one of the reasons we hired them is because of what Catherine is talking about. They actually talked to me about what they're doing for their staff. And I thought to myself, if they are talking to their staff about these mental health issues, they're actually going to deal with their clients in a wonderful, caring, and supportive way. So that's why I hired them. And I believe that they're going to help us reach more people by understanding the issues that my nonprofit organization deals with on a day-to-day basis. So thank you.
Thank you. And we love all our clients equally, as we all do, but there's no more important work than what we're doing for you, that's for sure. And just for perspective, our third panelist was going to be Dr. Copeland from Howard University, who was going to give us a student perspective on trauma and what it's like to go through the student experience and the application experience with all of the hate and anxiety and trauma that many folks are facing at the HBCUs. So we'll make sure we weave in her perspective maybe in some follow-up pieces as we go along. So Catherine, if you don't mind, let's level set first, because I've been using the word trauma several times already, and lots of folks walk into the room with their own sense of what trauma could mean. What does it mean in the context that we're talking about here?
Thanks for that. Yeah, it's true that trauma is one of those words that has become ubiquitous, and I think everybody has a sense of what they mean when they use it, but maybe we aren't all using the same definition. The definition that I use in my work and that we've been using within Ketchum is trauma is a psychological harm that affects performance and well-being. This is a kind of stripped down version of the SAMHSA definition, if you're familiar with that. It's the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration definition of victim. A few things about why we use that particular language. There are other definitions where they look at the experience. For instance, they'll say trauma is what comes from then a litany of 1 through 20 experiences. To me, that's somewhat problematic because different people have different reactions to the same experience. You could have 4 people in a car accident, and one of them is kind of shaken up, but is able to recount to the police very clearly what happened and go on to work that afternoon, and somebody else might be in shock, might end up going to the hospital, might struggle to go to work for the rest of the week and maybe not be able to drive a car for months. One of those is not better than the other. These are just the range of human reactions. And so what we want to do is not focus so much on is the reaction appropriate to the experience the person had, but instead focus on what is the person in front of me experiencing and how can I better support them. Then one final thing about that is that piece about it affects performance and well-being. My work really centers on trauma in the workplace. So this is not an instance where we want people kind of going into somebody's office and trying to really suss out, well, how are you feeling? And if you're a manager, you're not their therapist. The goal is really to figure out, is this person experiencing something that's affecting their ability to do their job? And if so, how can we provide the supports around them that they need so that they can continue to thrive in their role?
It's interesting because when we first started putting together a trauma-informed offering, Michelle Baker, who is on our team, she spearheaded it, it's her brainchild. I literally said, I love everything about it. It's so relevant, it's so timely, we all need this, but do we have to call it trauma? And resoundingly, Michelle, the rest of the team, Catherine, the other folks we're working with to put it together said, you absolutely have to call it trauma because that's what it is. It's not the old version definition of trauma perhaps that we all have thought of. It's the new world version of trauma, and we have to be informed about it if we're going to operate and create programs with our clients for our stakeholders in an informed way. So it's absolutely fascinating. So Susan, in your line of work, we've obviously seen mental health issues skyrocket over the last few years. In reality, but also in awareness and acknowledgement and discussion and people willing to talk about it. In fact, there's a piece of data that says that 70% of Americans say they have experienced a traumatic event in their life, which has resulted in mental health issues. That's like 250 million people, something like that. What are you hearing on the front lines of those mental health workers that are dealing with these issues, with folks that may be coming to them for the first time in their life, willing to acknowledge it, willing to talk about it? What are you hearing from them on the front lines?
So I'm glad you're asking that question. So my organization is a professional membership organization. So my members are social workers, researchers, clinicians, psychiatrists, working in the fields of anxiety and depression and related disorders. And let's remember that our therapists are people. They are also going through many of the issues that their clients are. And what I'm seeing as a person who deals with my members, or our members, is that they are overwhelmed. Not every one of them, but many of them. They feel guilty that they can't take more clients, as you know, because it's wonderful that everybody's now talking about it. There's less stigma. But if you are acknowledging that you have mental health issues, you need to seek help. So if there's not enough people to help you, then that actually adds to your discomfort. So the frontline workers are stretched thin. Many people are leaving the profession. They are overworked. Many of them are underpaid social workers. And many in this mental health industry are not diverse enough. So if you are a person who doesn't look like me and you would like to go see a therapist, and you don't see someone like yourself, or also someone who may have had the lived experience, or may have a different sexual orientation, or a different accent, or a different religion, and if there's not enough people there to support you, you also are not potentially getting the help you need. So I personally am so happy we're talking about mental health. I really am. But I think that's not enough. And I think we're almost patting ourselves on the back by going, aren't we great? Our society is talking about it. We're so wonderful and open-minded. And I'm going, okay, what are we doing as a society? What is the government doing as a society? So I am not going, yay, 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 people. Yay, we're so wonderful. I'm going, okay, there's a lot of hard work left to do. And our frontline workers are so overwhelmed, so stressed. And we've got to remember, they are us in a different job. So if we're stressed, they're stressed. So we also have to be somewhat mindful and also kind to them.
Right. That's a lot of the work we hope to be doing with you, for sure. So I imagine a lot of folks here are thinking about their own workplace and their own workforce and their own teams, actually. And this is your area of expertise, Kate, is trauma in the workplace. And the U.S. Surgeon General just recently released a report sort of calling out, maybe they didn't use the word trauma, but they used toxic workplace, referencing all the greats we're going through, the great resignation, the quiet quitting, the loud quitting, the quiet resignation, the loud firing, all this stuff that's making the workplace very, very traumatic and very hard to deal with. And when you factor in folks, many of our folks are sitting at home staring at a screen all day long, that adds its own level of trauma and dealing with home issues at the same time. So long-winded way of saying, like, how does it show up in the workplace? Like, how does it come alive, and what can we maybe do about it or think it through?
I think traditionally we've sort of thought of trauma as what we do on our own time. You know, it's, well, when I'm going to go to work, I'm going to be professional and put together, and whatever it is that I have going on in my, mental health doesn't come into the workplace. But that's not really how it works. Trauma's not a jacket that we can just take off. Time to go to work. And I'll put that on at the end of the day. We carry it with us all the time, and it comes into our work. It comes into our work in terms of our engagement, our productivity, our creativity, our communication. And as Jim referenced, there are a lot of recent studies that are showing this. I think Gallup recently did their 2022 State of the Global Workforce report, and they found that engagement is at the lowest level ever. Only about a third of workers reports feeling engaged at work right now. And the other thing that really struck me in that report was they found that 18% of workers reported feeling angry at work every single day. Isn't that incredible? Think about that, angry every single day. And I'm curious, I would love it maybe when we get into the Q&A, does that resonate? Is that something that you're seeing as well? I did a training recently for some folks who work at the state of California, and their job is to handle complaints of bias and harassment, and they themselves are reporting much higher levels of harassment and even death threats than they've ever seen. I've had people say, I've been doing this job for 20 years and I never received a single death threat, and I've had 3 in the last 3 months. It's shocking, and we're seeing it in things like road rage and blow-ups at the grocery store. And I think people are so afraid at this point that it's so hard. It's like people are saying to me things like, that straw that broke the camel's back. That was a couple months ago. Like I can't do this anymore, and it's showing up in the ways that we're trying to do our work. I mean, depression alone has tripled in the last few years, and depression affects our ability to do our jobs and whether we're able to complete our tasks at all. So when we're seeing these levels, we're seeing people who are not able to get out the work that they want to get. I'm sure you're seeing this in your own life, that brain fog, familiar with that sense? That can be a trauma response. It's a sense of overwhelm. So it's affecting the ways that we are able to work on our own and also the ways that we're able to work with each other. And that's why it's so important, this work that Ketchum is doing, and I hope that you all are thinking about these issues as well, because the only way we're going to get through this is together. We have to learn how to better support each other through these times.
Follow-up question for you on that, actually, if you don't mind. So Kate is one of 3 experts that we brought on our team to help us develop this trauma-informed communications offering. Kate looks at it through the lens of the marketplace. We have another expert who looks at it through the lens of marginalized communities, another who looks at it through the lens of sort of societal issues. For the folks here, and Kate has been doing a lot of the initial training, so I know I can kind of put you on the spot. For the folks here, what are a couple tips that you can give them to bring back to their teams to help become, or start to become, because this doesn't happen overnight, this is a process, it's a journey, we're just starting the journey. What are some tips that you could give them to bring back to their teams?
I love this question. So one of the things I think is so important is to engage in active listening. Active listening means not just we sit there letting the person talk, but we create the circumstances where people feel comfortable opening up. And one of the things that is so important and so hard, in particular the more senior we get at our jobs, is not problem solving. How do we get more senior? Is by being really good at problem solving. We spot the issue, we come up with a very quick solution, and we move on. That's a great thing in most roles at work. But in this area, when somebody comes to us and says, I have to tell you, I'm going to miss our next staff meeting because I have to fly out to California. My brother is having brain surgery. And if your instant response is, well, we can just move the meeting, it's no problem. You're missing something, right? So be willing to just step back and actually hear what the person is saying before you jump right to the problem solving. So to me, if you can do anything, that's the most important thing. And I'm going to give one more, which is we have to model this behavior. We have to model that it is okay to talk about hard things. It is one thing to say as a leader, we have a phenomenal employee assistance program. They've got really great mental health professionals. They're free, they're confidential, and I recommend that you use them if you need them. Very different to say, we have a phenomenal EAP program. They have trained mental health professionals. They're free, they're confidential, and they really helped me when I needed them. When we make that statement, we make it okay for other people to talk about what they're going through and to access supports.
Very good advice. When Kate's been doing the training with our people, it's on screen, so we're all on Teams, we're all commenting in the chat, we're all commenting live, and you just see everybody just soak this up because it's rather intuitive, but to make it a behavior, you have to really think it through and sort of really embrace it. Yep. So Susan, follow up to your question. You just talked about the state of the mental health worker and the frontline. We do a lot of healthcare work, also the frontline healthcare worker also, how they're stressed, they're overwhelmed, they're guilty, and they're feeling like they're never doing enough. We feel that. We do a lot of work in that space. We're in Washington. your organization is in Washington. There's lots of legislators who want to make some change as well, who want to help these folks. What are some things that we need to put in place to help these people? Like, how do we help them? What kind of legislation do we need, or should we be working on to actually help them and not just empathize with them?
So I just want to go back to you real quickly.
Yeah.
I think your advice about acknowledging it and saying it helped me is wonderful. I think that's one of the best pieces of advice I've also heard, so thank you.
Thank you.
So I find this also an interesting question about the legislature, because I think I don't think there is an agreement among the political parties about what to do on mental health issues. I still think that there is a stigma amongst some that we as Americans should pull ourselves up on the bootstraps, and it is your fault that you still feel that trauma. It's your fault that you're not getting over it. So I go back to the issue that we're talking about, mental health, and I'm happy we are, but I still think there is a little bit of a judgment underlying why does it take you so long? You know, it's been 4 years since the incident happened. So what we could do as policy, I think we have to have parity. And what I mean by parity, if you think about it, if you have a chronic physical condition, some of your health plans allow you to visit the doctor many, many times. For mental health care, it's limited. So it should have exactly the same amount of visits allowed. We should also open up that reimbursement of more medications. There are so many different medications on the marketplace for various disorders. Why do health insurance companies limit it? Because we might be, all three of us, depressed. He may need a different medication. I may need a different medication. You may need a different medication. But if we're all on the same health insurance plan and they only reimburse for one medication, it might just help one of us. So that is, I think, very important and needs to be discussed more. And then I think the whole issue about telemental health. So I spoke to my board chair yesterday to prepare for this meeting, and he's a psychiatrist. So let's say he lives in the state of California, and he's doing telemental health with somebody in the state of California 9 hours away or 8 hours away. But if that patient moves to Texas, he is no longer allowed to do telemental health. He feels guilty, he can't help his patient. Now why? Do you ask yourself, 9 hours in the same state, they go across state lines and they can't help you? Does that not seem a bit odd to all of you? So if we could fix anything, I would say we need to really focus on that, because that would also alleviate some of the pressure on some of the clinicians who are maybe overwhelmed. There might be somebody in a different state who is just as good, who might be able to take more patients. So I think we need to really have a policy discussion on that. But to me, the real issue is parity. We should all be able to have access to, also let's be honest, if you're an insurance company, they give you a list of professionals who are part of the insurance company. If you want to find somebody else whom you may feel more comfortable with, you have to pay out of pocket, which might make you see someone who might not help you. So everybody's paying all this money, you're going, and nothing's happening. You're not getting better. So again, I keep going. I'm so happy we're talking about mental health, but that's really not the issue. We need to really look at what we can do to now support the people who are suffering from serious mental health issues.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, that issue of the telemedicine. I think
drives me
this
crazy.
is something that people have been very averse to for a very long time, and we've seen through the pandemic what a difference it can make.
Yes.
I have a friend, she's African American, her son is African American, he's a teenager, and he really was suffering. He was having a mental health crisis, and she wanted to find an African American therapist for him. She really wanted to find a black man to be the therapist. There were none, nowhere. Right? She couldn't find any. And I think, boy, what a,
But maybe if you could have gotten somebody from a different state, and we know that telemental, not for everyone, but we know it's working.
Yeah.
So again, what does it matter if you're in California or I'm in DC, if I've been seeing somebody or I find somebody wonderful? If we really care about the individual mental health, why not get the resources together? In some states, do you know that you have to drive 5 hours to see a mental health expert if there's no telemental health?
Right.
They're overwhelmed. So why couldn't that person see someone else? And again, make sure that the person is good. And my association has a list of questions you should ask before you find the right therapist, because you need to make sure they follow the modality that suits you. I mean, not every therapeutic model is right for you.
Right.
So you should interview the person who is going to be helping you. And I think we're afraid to ask questions of a therapist. For example, to say, so, do you follow cognitive behavior therapy? Or do you follow another modality? And then ask them why. Or ask, how will we figure out if I'm getting better? I don't know if any of you see therapists, but when my friends tell me they see a therapist, I go, how many years have you been seeing them? They go, I don't know, 4 or 5 years. I go, have you ever asked the therapist, am I getting better? What should I do? When you take drugs for cancer, you know how long the treatment, right. Just ask. Don't be afraid of asking the therapist the same questions you would ask your doctor. Interview 3 or 4 people. You don't have to go with the first person. The other thing, which I would recommend, we all go to our friends, right? Whom are you seeing? Whom can you recommend? And we like to go because they've been tested. Just because a therapist is good for your friend, right, does not mean that they're good for you. So yes, you should ask that person for a referral, interview them, but your friend and you may not have the same issues. So keep that in mind and ask questions. You have a right and a duty to your own mental health journey to find the right therapist for you. And if it takes 3 interviews, and most good therapists will allow you to call them for 15 minutes. A lot of people don't know that. Most good therapists will get on the phone with you for 15 minutes to see if it's a good fit. The therapist may also decide you're not a good fit. That's okay too.
Right.
Yeah, it's good.
But
actually.
ask. It's really important for your own self. Don't be passive.
Great advice. Great advice. What's fascinating about being trauma informed, it is this, I'll say beautiful, I'll use that word, beautiful blend of trauma, the way we've been talking about it, mental health and mental well-being, health equity, which I know a lot of us are working on, issues and crisis work, employee communications, just good communications principles. It's this beautiful blend of all of that, but in the lens of what we're all dealing with in this world. I mean, that's what I find really fascinating about it. Kate, so you've educated me that to be a trauma-informed organization, you have to really have a good understanding of your employees and what their needs are and what they're going through. You also have to have a really good understanding of the other stakeholders you're dealing with in terms of what's the work that you do for them, where are they? Yep. What are some tips you can give to the leaders who are trying to make this happen in their organization from a leadership standpoint to instill that from the top and have it trickle through to not only the teams, but also to the work that they put out?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I always feel like the hallmarks of a trauma-informed workplace are clarity and choice. So you are as clear as you can be about what are the needs of the organization, right? I mean, we can't stop doing the work, right? Or else the organization will cease to be. So very, very clear about the needs of the organization, even about your own needs. And sometimes that means boundary setting with your employees, with your colleagues, with your clients. So as much clarity as you can provide, and then choice within that. So given that, we have these deadlines we have to meet, we have these projects that we have to complete, can we provide as much flexibility to the individuals involved so that they can figure out how to make this work, given everything that they are struggling with in their own life? One of the things that I think is important to understand. When people are going through periods of trauma, the way that trauma can affect your brain is it gives you, there's a part of your brain called the amygdala. It shoots out adrenaline when you're feeling that stress or trauma response. And one of the things that the amygdala does is it kind of tones down the parts of the brain that are less helpful for protection, right? So the amygdala is trying to make sure that we can be physically protected in case we get attacked by a bear or something, right? That's its job. So it gives us a flood of adrenaline in case we need to, use our muscles and run away. But it also dials down the parts of the brain that are less relevant for immediate physical protection. And most specifically, the part of the brain associated with complex thinking and rational decision making. So you may have found, maybe even recently, when you're talking with people and you think, we just covered that. Why are you asking me about this again, right? We went over all of this already. People are not hearing everything that you're saying. And so it's important when you have a workforce or even an individual employee that is struggling, is dealing with some pretty heavy issues, you have to communicate so much more than you might think seems appropriate. Say it again and again and again. One of the things I saw in my work with victims is I felt like they heard about a third of what I said. And so I tried to say everything 3 times. Now you all are so good at that, so I'm not worried about your ability to do that in your work. Bring that into the office as well, in your work with your colleagues, because they need it too. It's very, very difficult to process information when you're having that trauma response. The other thing is the way to lower that trauma response is to make people feel safer. You're okay. You don't have to worry right here. We are going to take care of you. Part of that is the choice element of it. So we have these parameters. These are the things that we have to do. But within that, I know you're trying to manage a lot at home with a very sick spouse. So let's figure out how to give you as much flexibility as you need. And you just see people's shoulders drop. Okay, good. And now that I'm not worried that I have to fight you to make sure that I get the time I need to take care of my sick spouse, now I can focus on the work and on taking care of the spouse at home. So those are the things I think are really the hallmark for leaders. It's just remember those 2, clarity and choice.
One follow-up question to that, because it came up in the training that we've been doing. Yeah. So as a leader, all of us as leaders, we have our own trauma we're dealing with on a daily basis, like we've been talking about. Leading up to this, I had a whole bunch of stuff that was going on that was very trauma-inducing. Mm-hmm. As a leader, how do you put that over there and then walk into your team and bring them the stability and calm and guidance that they need, knowing they're also got their own stuff going on? Like, how do you put it over there?
Yeah, it's so important. And Jim, I got to say, I admire you so much because you are definitely managing a lot and showing up with sincerity and empathy and vulnerability every day in a way that's very inspiring. So one of the things that is important to remember is that leaders set the tone for the organization. If you're the leader of a team at work, an entire organization, if you're the leader of a faith-based community, if you're a leader of your family, your energy is contagious. And so that's why it is so important, particularly important if you are the leader of a team, that you are managing your own energy well. So a few things on that. One thing is burnout is one of those issues where the best defense is a good offense. We have to take affirmative steps to protect ourselves. One of those is what I call a daily reset. Can you just have something that you do every day that is just about your own mental health? For me, I do 5 minutes of yoga, 5 minutes of meditation every day after I shower. I did it this morning, I will do it tomorrow and the next day. It's a promise to myself, and I do it. It doesn't have to be that. My sister-in-law says, well, my meditation is kickboxing. That's fine too. Whatever it is that works for you. Maybe it's playing the guitar, just something that actually feeds you. See if you can make a commitment to it every day. The other thing is we have to get better at talking about the things that we're struggling with. I think often, particularly when we're really empathetic people, good listeners, we tend to be very, very good at showing up for others and less good at asking for help when we need it. It's so, so important. So, I would ask you right now, can you try to think of 5 people that you could call when you're having a hard day? Just give you a second. And raise your hand when you've got them. 5 people you could call. Good. If you are struggling to think of 5, remember journals count. Dogs, really good at this.
Probably the best.
Yeah, don't underestimate the value of therapy, okay? So work on that, nourish that in yourself, that ability to reach out to others. And then the final thing I would say on that is just start to notice your own warning signs that you're starting to struggle from burnout. I spoke with a woman once and she said, yeah, I think I'm not very good at recognizing it. She said, I thought I was fine, and then I was on a work call, a conference call with my team, and I just started screaming at everybody. I thought, yeah, that's a sign, you know? So try to notice, you know, there's usually whispers first, right? So just start to notice those whispers. Maybe it's a sore throat. For me, it's often a sore throat. You start to get sick. Maybe it's insomnia. Maybe it's when things that are normally fun for you start to feel like a burden. Just start to notice those. And when you see them, double down on those first 2, the self-care and the reaching out.
That's awesome. Such great tangible tips from Susan and from Kate on how we all can become trauma informed and also manage our own teams and our own issues. Want to open it up to all of you if you have any questions. Yes. Oh, way in the back there.
Oh.
That was a very first assertive hand. Yes.
Okay, so hi, my name is Kendra Llewellyn. I'm here with Profit and Stagwell. And first of all, I just want to thank you guys for even mentioning telehealth, because I'm from North Dakota, a largely rural state that unfortunately really notoriously doesn't support people, let alone those with minorities or who don't fit in. So thank you very much for that. And also for the fact of, you know, like leaders lead. And the bosses that I've had who have shown that vulnerability, 100% have like the whole team, when they do experience trauma, have been able to bounce back much quicker, and it's a good tone to set. But my question is really around, you know, how do you explain to, especially in a state like mine that really kind of undervalues it, that expanding empathy and understanding, especially to your coworkers, it's not a loss, it's not a burden, that like, it's not a finite amount of empathy that we can expand to people, right. You know? Like, what would you say to that, I guess?
Yeah, I love this question. And this is where the lawyer in me comes out, because, man, I mean, this is one of those areas, I think, where it's important to make the case, right? You have to explain to people why it matters for them, and often that means for whatever their interest is. So maybe it's the bottom line, maybe it's their constituents, you know, depending on your audience, but speak to them in the language that they will understand and that will get at their personal goals. What I have found is, when I start with the case, you know, I start with the statistics, and there are so many out there. I mean, the Gallup poll, the new Surgeon General, there's so much stuff that you can point to, right? That shows that when we are trauma informed, we get more productivity, less turnover, better engagement. I mean, across the board, you can really see the effect. And then the reality is, when we don't provide that empathetic response, again, remember, this is whispers first, and then it can get very, very loud. If we are ignoring it, this is where we end up with the very, very loud results. We end up with lawsuits and news articles, and things can get, you know, an explosion where suddenly half of your staff is walking out. If we can get better at supporting each other on a day-to-day basis, the way that you said your bosses have done for you, and people feel seen and heard every day, we're going to get better results in terms of the work on a daily basis, and also avoid some of those negative kind of explosions. So I think that's the key, is explain it in a way that makes sense to them. And then I've got to say, I've done, you know, speeches where it's all audiences of CEOs, right? And, you know, you would think they would be very reluctant to talk about this. They need to hear the business case first. But then what I've found is, after you make that, they all have their own story. Mm-hmm. They all have the story of, you know, somebody who wasn't there for them, or, you know, I had one guy said, I've been thinking for 20 years about the way we let that man down. Wow. So they need to hear that case first, but then it resonates. They feel it too.
So can I just add, because you're all communications experts.
Yeah.
One of the things we haven't talked about is the tone of emails. I believe that I've seen, and I think I see people nodding, during the pandemic, there's nothing worse than an email that is curt, unpleasant, makes you feel like crap after you read it. All of us have been the recipient of these emails. I think one of the things we don't talk about enough in the workplace is the style and tone of emails. They are, I think, very hurtful. When people are stressed, they send off these emails, just rather than occasionally picking up the phone and talking, realizing that there's no criticism, because we are like the criminologist or whatever in the good old Soviet days, which may be coming back, where we tried to figure out what it all meant. If you spend time trying to analyze whether your boss is being curt, mean, short, you're already anxious. And I have to say, I am very mindful of my email style, because I've noticed I'm very short, maybe because I'm a lawyer or English is not my first language. So I really think about it. And I think we're not talking enough about emails, about how they make one feel. And I see a lot of nods. And I think that's something we need to discuss in an office, about that certain email things are just not appropriate. Think before you read it, before you send it. Take a few seconds, and if you're irritated about a deadline that's missed, don't go, you missed the deadline. Just, we all have been guilty. Every one of us in this room has been guilty of, let's be honest, undermining and nasty emails. And each one of us has made someone else feel like crap, and they've made us feel like crap, which is not good for our mental health.
Either deliberately or not deliberately.
Probably most of the time, not deliberately.
Right. That's being trauma informed.
Yes.
That's exactly the whole thing. Now you're all going to leave, and you're going to write absolutely loving emails to your colleagues every single day.
Send a hug with every email.
I think there's a question right here.
I think we got one right here, and then you with the microphone. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Mubashra. I'm with Fleischman Hillard High Road. So my question for you is, and again, thank you for this incredible advice for leaders and for us as colleagues. But I think we also don't talk enough about caregivers, those who are helping loved ones or family members deal with trauma or anxiety or depression. And I think that also bleeds into the work that we're doing. Especially if you have, a big family, or if it's somebody in your immediate family that's dealing with these issues. What can leaders or what can organizations do to support staff that are caregivers for those dealing with trauma?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I think it's so important to recognize that, as you've said. To me, part of it is that acknowledgement, right? We acknowledge that you have huge responsibilities outside of the day job, right? And I also like that you have phrased it as caregiving. I think often people say parenting, and it's not only parents who are dealing with this. So it's a lot of the language we use too. Are we being inclusive in the language, or are we inadvertently cutting out people who are dealing with very heavy issues as well? So I think, again, it comes back to these issues of clarity and choice, just providing as much flexibility as we can and keep those lines of communication open. Let people know that you are understanding, you want to hear what's going on for them, and you want to make sure that this works so that they're able to thrive at work as well, given everything going on.
That's awesome. We have time for one quick one. I saw a hand over here, yeah.
Hi, so Ariana Lombard with Big Valley Marketing, and I'm a Zillennial, somewhere in between a millennial and a Gen Zer. And I would say most of my generation has been trauma impacted as I've grown up.
Absolutely.
So I'm curious how you see this impacting the future of work and policy as this young generation of people where trauma is the norm are coming into the workplace.
Sure.
Yeah, you can go on, and I will.
So she knows more about this, but most of my staff is you, and my daughter is you. She tells me every day the mistakes I make dealing with you. So I am very, I'm very aware and traumatized by her. You know what? I don't know. I don't know. I actually don't know the answer. And why I don't know the answer? Because we don't yet know really the long-term impact of what you're discussing. And we also don't really know the future of the workplace. We're going through an experiment, this hybrid, this working remotely, this and that. I don't think we know, at least I believe, we don't yet know enough to give you a really informed answer. I wish I could, because I think your generation is dealing with so many additional burdens that are external. For example, I know that young people, your generation, I'm not sure the young people is the right term, of worry about climate change, political unrest, things that people like my generation didn't always comprehend and understand. Also, the economic fragility, I think, is harder. And I think also and I think the media is a bit to blame, and I love the media. This constant talking about quitting, quiet quitting, uninformed. I don't even know anymore what quitting or not quitting or working or not working means. It's a stressful, like, is your colleague quitting? Are they just sick today? Are they looking for a job? What do they mean? And as an executive director, I am constantly like, what does this mean? What are they doing? How are they doing it? And I don't know. I have to tell you, I am so lost, and I have not a clue.
Great way to phrase it.
I try every single day, and I'm sure I fail. And I think it's up to your generation to gently, more gently than my daughter, to inform the generation of leaders of how we should act.
Yes.
And be also kinder to us, and realize that often we just don't know, and we make mistakes because we don't know this new world. Does that help? I don't know if that helps.
That's awesome. It's a great way to wrap it up, too, because I know we're out of time, so sorry about that. I hope you learned something. I hope you were inspired, and feel free to follow up with any other questions, because I know there were a lot of questions, so thank you.
Thank you.